On behalf of Aphasia Access, thanks everybody for being here to our next installment of the Distinguished Speaker Series. We're very glad and very proud to have with us Dr. Roberta Elman, who will be presenting on looking back and moving forward. And before I introduce Roberta formally, just a couple of quick notes. First off, everybody knows June is Aphasia Awareness Month coming up, so we'll have some great things happening. Many of you are doing things in your groups and in your centers, in your clinics, so want to hear about those, and we'll be having weekly events happening with Aphasia Access. We have a couple brag and steals that will be happening with individuals with aphasia and programs, so stay tuned for those as well as other events happening, and keep us all posted what's going on in your neighborhood. A quick thank you once again to those that participated and were part of the Leadership Summit. So it's just been a month or two, but want to thank again everybody who came to that, to our conference chairs, to Esther and Jamie and Gretchen, to everybody who was able to support the summit. It was really a great way to get together, be in a great part of the country, be able to see TAP, get to see Maura's background, get to see it in person. So thanks again for everybody's support for that summit. So let's talk a bit about our Distinguished Speaker Series today. So in terms of the format, we're going to run it just like we've done the other Distinguished Speaker Series. So Roberta will present for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll have a discussion, questions, thoughts, ideas, and I'll moderate that. We just ask that you hold off on questions or comments until after Roberta's presented. We'll have plenty of time to have conversation, but especially, it might be kind of tempting to put something in the chat or a link or something like that, but we just want to hold off on those until we have the chance to open it up for conversation, and then we'll make sure to wind things up by the top of the hour. So
before you go, just the one other piece, which is why the fun of controlling the buttons, I can bring myself in for a second. We will record this front part, but please do know, keeping with past practice and our traditions, when we get to the discussion, we're going to turn the recording off. So hopefully you feel able to dive in with whatever's on your mind, support others with your feedback on what they want to say, but that recording will eventually stop when we're all talking. Bye.
Good point. Good point. Thanks, Todd. So let me formally introduce our exceptionally distinguished speaker for today. So we all know Dr. Roberta Elman. Roberta Elman is President, CEO, and founder of the Aphasia Center of California, an independent nonprofit organization providing speech-language treatment, clinical research, training, consultations based in Oakland. Prior to beginning the Aphasia Center in California, in 1996, Dr. Elman was co-director of rehabilitation at an outpatient medical rehabilitation center and served as director of the speech-language department. Roberta has more than 40 years of experience in assessment, treatment in aphasia and other neurogenic communication disorders, is an internationally invited speaker, author of numerous professional publications. And Roberta, I actually did a little search this morning and came across what I think might be your earliest that I could find published paper, which is a CAC proceedings from 1987, Appraisal and Diagnosis of Neurogenic Communication Disorders in Remote Settings. So, and that was co-author, yeah. And that was at Lake of the Ozarks, CAC, I believe. So 1987, and from there, a long and distinguished list, including, in addition to articles, also textbooks, editor of the Group Treatment of Neurogenic Communication Disorders, The Expert Clinician's Approach, and co-edited with her good friend and mentor, Dr. Audrey Holland, The Neurogenic Communication Disorders and Life Participation Approach, the Social Imperative in Supporting Individuals and Families. Roberta has received the 2019 Audrey Holland Award from Aphasia Access, 2020 honors of ANCDS, and most recently, the 2022 honors of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And while we throw all those around, after a while, you hear all of those accolades and they start to run together. Just to be clear, in terms of the ASHA alone, the honors of the association, distinguished contributions to the discipline of communication sciences and disorders, and the highest honor of the association, contributions have been of such excellence that they have enhanced or altered the course of the profession. So, with that being said, it is our tremendous pleasure to have with us today Dr. Roberta Elman, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Tom, very much. I think what that all made me feel is just old. So anyway, let me share my screen. It's a pleasure to be here. And let's get, okay, so hopefully you can see that my title slide does look good.
Yep, we can see it. Looks great, Roberta.
Okay, so those of you who've heard me talk before know I have a fairly informal presentation style, which won't change today. But it's my pleasure to be here. And this was kind of an interesting talk to think about. I wasn't sure if it was kind of almost like a commencement address or kind of your whole professional life summed up in 15 minutes. And I'm taking a little bit of a different approach. And so you'll get to see that in a second, hopefully. Let's see if I can advance my slides. There we go. All right, so I want to start with some disclosures. Get rid of some of these things that are blocking me. So, and you'll see why I'm mentioning this especially. So you can look through there. I'm not going to read it all, but there are some financial disclosures, and some non-financial disclosures, and Tom's mentioned some of those publications already, so I won't spend too much more time here. And I also have, goodness, come on, a disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation are my own and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of my employer. Okay, so with that, my goal today actually is to rock the boat a little bit, and I'm enjoying, I haven't made it through all the way, Deb, but I'm enjoying reading Deb Meyerson's book, Rocking the Boat, How to Inspire Change from Within Your Organization. And so my attempt today is to rock the boat a little bit. Some of you know me well enough, know I tend to do that anyway, but not to capsize it. Okay, so we'll see at the end whether I'm in the water or still upright. So I'm thinking back, and Tom was kind enough to think back to some of those very early papers, but I've been in the field for more than 40 years now. And thinking back to the 1980s, I think the aphasia community was pretty small. There weren't many of us doing much. There were a few of us trying some things, but there wasn't much of a real community there out in the aphasia world. There were certainly people with aphasia, but there weren't a lot of opportunities or other services for them once they finish their traditional rehabilitation sessions. When we go ahead now to the 2020s, I think the aphasia community, it's a metropolis compared especially to the 1980s, at least in part due to the impact of the life participation approach to aphasia and seeing models and people trying a lot of different things. And I think that brings a lot of opportunities, but I think what I'm going to focus a little bit on today are some of the challenges I see kind of from my viewpoint, and these are my own views, and I will look forward to the discussion and hearing all of your views too. So I kept thinking about what did I want to focus on, and I wanted to focus on some things that I haven't heard focused on very much. And as I started thinking of words, I kind of had a theme. And so my theme today is the letter E. Okay, and I like the letter E. You know, you can't be an Elman and not like the letter E. So these are the things I'm going to try to talk about in just the next few minutes. And those of you, I also like cookies. So how could that go wrong? Cookies and the letter E. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethics, a little bit about evidence, a little bit about expertise, and a little bit about the extended aphasia community. And I don't think, talking about expert, I don't know that I'm an expert in any of these. So I'm just raising this as discussion points and maybe an opportunity to have the discussion. And I haven't heard it. Maybe it's been going on and I'm out of the loop. All right. So let's start with ethics. And I'm covering my own slides here. There we go. So it's more in the news than ever. You can't turn on the news or look at a paper or go on the internet. It's from small towns to the Supreme Court. There's all kinds of discussions about ethics. And I want to spend a few minutes on conflicts of interest and why this may be important for the aphasia community going forward and moving forward. Okay. Every time I move something, there we go. So let's just talk about what a conflict of interest is. Most of you know, but just as a being on the same page. So conflict of interest occurs when an entity or individual becomes unreliable because of a clash between personal or self-serving interests and professional duties or responsibilities. So a conflict occurs when a company or person has a vested interest, such as money, status, knowledge, relationships, or reputation, which puts into question whether their actions, judgment, or decision-making can be considered unbiased. So that's kind of the definition that I'm using. And that, as a subnote, that the bias can occur without intention or awareness. It doesn't have to be something that you're purposely doing, that the biases creep in and potentially. Okay. So I want to talk about an organization which I think has the highest standards when it comes to ethics and conflicts of interest. And it happens to be a national organization that's headquarters in the Bay Area, and it's called Breast Cancer Action. Some of you might be aware of it. It's a smaller organization. It's not as big as a lot of the larger breast cancer organizations, but it has an amazing U.S. education and advocacy role. It's driven by and supported by people living with breast cancer. And as I said, the national organization is headquartered in Northern California, and I've been to some of their events and on their mailing list as disclosure. Okay, so this is what they've come to as an advocacy organization. Given the mission of cancer education and advocacy, they really attempt to reduce any conflict of interest in the organization's decision making. And how do they do this? They do not accept corporate donations or have any organizational leaders who are connected with companies that either profit from the diagnosis or treatment of cancer, or who manufacture or sell products with evidence of possibly causing cancer. They have decided that their independence is central to their organization and its mission. So for Breast Cancer Action, that independence is vital. Okay, they were actually the ones, I don't know if many of you have heard of the word pink washing, but they are the ones that really came up with that whole concept. And that's where there are organizations out there, I'm not going to name any names so you can relax, that might have, let's say a chemical company that might have some evidence out in the literature that it could be causing cancer. And during Breast Cancer Awareness Month or whatever, they contribute to different breast cancer organizations or other cancer organizations. And for breast cancer awareness, they have a pink ribbon that they put on their products or on their advertising. And that's what Breast Cancer Action terms pink washing, kind of to get them off the hook. So when a company provides funding or support to another organization, it can become difficult to remain unbiased. And this bias may occur, as I mentioned before, with or without awareness. So that's why Breast Cancer Action doesn't accept that type of donations, and they don't have people in basically governance positions. So we now have, if we kind of pivot and think about the aphasia community, we now have a wide variety of businesses and organizations in the aphasia community. We went from that little town of just a few people, a few organizations, to this metropolis. And even though we're all working with and for people who are living with aphasia, and many people with aphasia are people starting organizations now, which is terrific, our goals may be different. So I'm just putting that out there, and I'll be interested to hear what you guys say. And the aside, which isn't really an aside, I guess it's important, is that speech language pathologists are held to a very high standard by the ASHA Code of Ethics, which was just revised in March. So I'm not going to read that, but it's there. If you're a speech pathologist, take a look. We're all under that Code of Ethics. So actually, before I was really thinking about these types of things, I was asked to write an article for Seminars in Speech and Language by Jennifer Horner. And most of you know who Jennifer is. She's now retired, but she is a speech language pathologist who went back to school to become a lawyer. So she has those dual degrees, and she did the whole issue on ethics in different topic areas. And the topic area she asked if I would submit an article for peer review for that journal was ethical responsibilities to adults with communication impairments involved in group therapy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that now. I point you to that. What we did is basically pull out from the ASHA Code of Ethics some areas that might be problematic within the subject matter that we were writing about. And so I did that for group therapy, not just aphasia group therapy, but with adults. Okay, so just FYI, and maybe we can talk more about that later. I also wanted just to talk about the ADA effective communication requirements, and I love that that's being, I saw some tweeting and some social media posts about that, and that's basically saying that under ADA standards, people have to understand, especially in medical settings, but in other settings, what they are getting themselves into, basically, when it comes to either treatment or services. And we advocate for these, I think, increasingly well when thinking of other providers and organizations, such as hospitals, legal systems. But my question is, are we doing a good enough job within our own settings? All right, so kind of turning it to ourselves and our own practice settings. Are we sure that people with aphasia are getting all the support they need to understand fully things like informed consent? And there's an increasing number of research studies and surveys, and I'll talk about that toward the end again, but I know I'm getting requests to disseminate all kinds of studies. People are interested in aphasia now, that big community. And I would say that when I look at some of those flyers or look at some of the informed consent types of things, I'm not thinking that they're so good when it comes to how well they're really, how aphasia friendly they are. So let's just leave it at that for now. So looking at ourselves, I also wonder if people with aphasia, when it comes to things, when it comes to communication, do they always know if their demographic or other personal information might be used or shared for marketing, for advertising, sharing with other partners and allies? You're probably like me, you get a little slip like with your credit card company or with a financial institution, and it gives you, ways to opt out, and then there's lots of legalese. People with aphasia deserve the ability to opt in or opt out in ways that they truly understand what their information is being used for. And I think we should look externally to that, but also at our own practices about that and our own companies about that. And that right now, I mean, it was very clear that this part of this talk is being videotaped or recorded, that do people with aphasia are always given good information and aphasia friendly information that their video or audio recordings may be used or even archived for later use for varying purposes. So I don't know the answers to all of those, and just saying maybe moving forward we need to really look internally as well as externally. All right, so that's ethics. I've covered that quickly. Let's go on to evidence. So these are taken, the list of evidence and things I'm going to talk about is taken from research, not only in speech language pathology, and I've listed a partial list of the growing body of aphasiology literature providing evidence about what components make for effective aphasia groups. And it's partial, and I apologize if I've left your study off. But there's also an even bigger corpus of research evidence within psychology and social work and other similar organizations, and I haven't put any of that up here, okay? So when it comes to aphasia groups, I think the pandemic was amazing for how quickly practice kind of changed in an instance, really. So, and there were a lot of aphasia groups that were started, a lot of virtual groups, and that can be a really good thing. But I think that we want to also focus on what the evidence is showing us about what makes for effective aphasia groups. And the size of an aphasia group is important, and that is borne out not only in our own speech pathology literature, but also in social work and psychology. Seems like the consensus is that fewer than 10 people in a group is best, and I would say that's probably pushing it for an aphasia group. Otherwise, the group is really functioning more like a classroom, probably like what's happening right now, right? Where it's a didactic portion, I'm doing a little lecture and all of you are in the classroom, and then we'll open it up for discussion, but it's not going to be where there's a really interactive, there's too many people to have that happen. Another thing that's borne out in the evidence is that the consistency of the group members and the group facilitator is really important, that without consistency, cohesiveness and trust is unlikely, and without that cohesiveness where people feel like they know everybody else in the group and that that's consistent over time, it's really hard for people, just think of yourself, to start, I mean, just even building a community, you need to know who people are and feel that there's trust there. I am really stuck on this third one here, on this third bullet, that I think more and more, I'd love to see more research on this. So if you're out there looking for a research study, that the skill of the group facilitator, I have important here. I think it might be like most important. Almost anyone can do an aphasia group, right? You can put a bunch of people together in a room and you can be the facilitator, but you need training, experience, and skill to do it well. I'd love to talk more about that when we have some time for discussion. Some other things that I think we have evidence for: how you group people is important. Group members must have similar goals. They have to be a reason for them to be in that group, and they have to feel like they're working with people and that the things that are going on in the group are similar enough. So sometimes grouping by interest can be important. Other times grouping by severity of aphasia can be important. It really depends on the purpose of the group and the goals of the participants. And then communication support. I'm preaching to the choir right now, I know, but communication support is critical. Many people with aphasia benefit from those communication supports when provided by trained and skilled facilitators. Communication supports allow people with aphasia to participate. I have some good stories about that if you want to hear those later. The content and structure of the group is important. So I think part of the problem is sometimes we talk about aphasia groups like it's one thing. Like, you wouldn't talk about individual speech therapy, like you're having individual speech therapy, one-on-one speech therapy, and not say something more right after that, because you could be doing all kinds of different things in individual therapy. Same is true, obviously, for aphasia groups. So some groups are more structured, like a book club, and another group with specific content. Other groups will focus on general conversation or communication and maybe less structured, and those can also address some psychosocial topics related to living successfully with aphasia if the facilitator has those necessary counseling skills. That's kind of that aside. My sense is, and I think this is borne out by the evidence, but it may be more experiential for me at this point. That's where I think we need some data. The less the group structure, the more skill that is needed by the group facilitator. That's what I've witnessed over the last, 30 plus years of doing groups at this point. All right, so that's evidence. Let's talk about expertise. And I've been seeing this kind of in social media a little bit, and just wanted to get some discussion going on it. So my mentor and friend Audrey Holland talks about a three-legged stool, right? So when we talk about an expert or expertise, there's never one expert or one way of looking at expertise. So there are academics and clinicians, and that's blurring more and more, which is great, who studied about aphasia and maybe working with people who have aphasia. There are the care partners of people who are living with aphasia, and there are people living with aphasia themselves. And we need all of the above, right? It's never an or, I think it's always an and. So there is rarely a single expert. It depends on the question or the issue. And again, I'm not saying anything really unique, I don't think, but just trying to make a statement here. In general, I believe to gain a fuller understanding, a team or group of people who bring together a variety of expertise, perspectives, and approaches is vital. And that's not just true for aphasia. That's true for pretty much any area of problem solving. You're going to do better if you have different perspectives and approaches. There's participatory design, which is kind of a research approach, and that's being applied more and more to the area of aphasia, which is great. In companies, there's design thinking. It's really, excuse me, really very much the same thing. A company also in the Bay Area called IDEO, they're headquartered here, but they have, I think, satellites all over the world now. They purposely use this kind of thinking to create new products and new answers to things. In medicine, just thinking back to my days being on a tumor board, where you had different experts from different parts of medicine or paraprofessionals and other kinds of allied healthcare. I'm going to take a drink of water. And then lastly, some research. And I had the opportunity, excuse me, to write an article that was published last year in AJSLP, American Journal of Speech Language Pathology, where I kind of dive into this a little bit more. So those of you who are interested in it maybe haven't seen it. dig in, and I'd love to talk more about that if any of you are interested on the other side of my talk here. All right, and then finally, in the last E, extended, you can see I had to really like fight for finding an E here, extended aphasia community. So the programs and products in our aphasia community have grown enormously over the past 10 years, 40 years. Boy, my voice. If you're a voice therapist, let me know. Our community is now made up of large organizations and companies as well as grassroots programs. So I'm kind of circling back from where I started. The missions, goals, and focus of these companies, organizations, and programs definitely differ, and that's okay. They should. So even though the aphasia community has grown significantly, I think we're really fortunate, so this is a good thing, that most of us still know each other, or we're getting to know each other, or it's easy to reach out to one another. And that's one of the opportunities, I think, for an organization like Aphasia Access and other aphasia organizations that are bringing people together. I think that maintaining and growing a variety of programs and approaches benefits people living with aphasia. I think it benefits us all. It benefits people working with people who are living with aphasia. And here's a request, personal request to all the larger organizations and businesses out there. I would say, as someone who represents a smaller aphasia organization, be thoughtful about us out here, about the smaller programs when you make your business decisions. Okay, it's very challenging for small aphasia programs to survive in a metropolis. Just look at what is happening to small businesses everywhere. And that may just be what's going to happen. You know, I don't think we can hold back time, right? But I think we can make decisions that can keep a robust, diverse aphasia community. Survival of the smaller programs, I would argue, and I do have a vested interest as I say this, helps to make the entire aphasia community more robust and resilient. And many innovative ideas have emerged from community-based programs. So I would argue bigger is not necessarily better. I always love that book, Small is Beautiful by Schumacher. I would say, and I'm giving advice where it hasn't been asked for, but that's what I'm doing. Be thoughtful when expanding. Perhaps think about meeting needs in the aphasia deserts. And there are a lot of places without any aphasia services in this country. There are still too many of those. And even within big states like California, there are big metropolis cities of people where there's very little available. I would say another kind of related aside is universities and researchers are often asking aphasia centers and programs for assistance in distributing flyers. That seems all of a sudden even more than it was during the pandemic about research studies, or they're asking if staff members at aphasia centers or programs can attend focus groups and share our expertise. I would say, coming from a small, not-for-profit community-based organization, please consider compensating community-based aphasia programs for staff time, in addition to compensating the research participants with aphasia. When you're running a small organization, your salary is paid by that. It's not a given, right? You're kind of having to you're working for your dinner, if you will. And so where I think all of us want to be helping as much as we can, it would be nice to have some compensation. And sometimes I think organizations have that capacity and maybe they just haven't thought about that, how that could really help. I believe that the survival of a wide spectrum of organizations and businesses is important to the entire aphasia community going forward. So that's my argument. So one of my favorite singers, had to have another song in here, Joni Mitchell, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone. And so I would hate to see the smaller aphasia programs recede from view or being available 40 years from now. So this some of you may know, but maybe many of you don't. My dad was a sailor. He was actually raced his sailboat, which we could talk about. That was a whole nother thing. He had a Cal 24, and I know that we have some sailors out in the audience here today. And one of the sayings that is like embedded in my brain is my father would say when he needed help backing the Cal 24 out of the slip, and he was old school. He didn't have an inboard motor, and he wouldn't use his outboard motor unless there's absolutely no wind at all. He would say, Roberta, give me forward motion. So you don't want to go into the rocks when you're backing a boat out. You got to give forward motion to bring it forward. And so I would say to all of us in the aphasia community, as we look forward and move forward, let's see about getting that forward motion. So with that, I'm going to end.